The marriage of Queen Elizabeth II's only daughter to Captain Mark Phillips ended in a high-profile divorce, but it began beautifully. Anne, the Princess Royal, became Her Majesty's first child allowed not only to unite her life with a commoner, but subsequently to divorce him to marry another man of non-noble blood. Anne generally preferred to do everything her own way, maintaining independence even within a structure as strict as the royal family. And she always got what she wanted. The princess met her first husband, Mark Phillips, in 1968 at the Olympic Games in Mexico City, according to other sources, at a party for horse enthusiasts. A professional equestrian, his love for these animals and his mastery in handling them immediately won over Anne, who was an accomplished horsewoman herself. From then on, they would meet time and again at various equestrian competitions, fueling rumors of a romance. The royal family, of course, vigorously denied such a monstrous misalliance. However, when the enamored sportsman finally proposed to Her Royal Highness at the badminton horse trials, and she accepted, Elizabeth had to resign herself to it. 6 weeks later, Buckingham Palace officially announced the engagement and began preparations for a grand wedding, only the second in a century where a princess took a commoner as her husband. Although the princess's family gave their consent to her unequal marriage to the sportsman, they did not, of course, entirely approve of her choice. It is generally believed that this misalliance was considered particularly egregious by Anne's older brother and heir to the throne, Prince Charles, who once even quipped ironically that his sister was marrying Mark simply because she could not marry her horse. Anne and Charles were not enemies, but their relationship was not noted for being overly warm either. Why? Perhaps because the only thing they had in common were their parents. Disciplined, brave, and with a tough character, Anne was the complete opposite of the vulnerable and sensitive heir. Modern observers still shrug their shoulders, wondering if there is anything at all upon which the brother and sister can unanimously agree. As it turned out, no. And despite the fact that Charles and Anne almost never argued in public, one action by the princess spoke louder regarding the true relationship between them than any words. The young woman decided to hold her wedding exactly on her older brother's birthday. Little is known about how the Princess Royal chose her wedding date, but one thing is certain: it was a deliberate choice. Initially, Anne made it clear that she wished to celebrate the occasion in mid-November. One would think the royal family did not object. After all, about a quarter of a century earlier, during roughly the same period, November 20th, 1947, the wedding of Anne's parents, Elizabeth and Philip, had taken place. This could have been a very symbolic choice and the start of a new tradition. But why did Anne deem it a good idea to approve November 14th, Charles's birthday, as her wedding date? This remains a mystery. After all, in 1973, the Prince of Wales was celebrating, though not a milestone, a very significant 25th birthday. Was there really no more suitable day? November 14th, 1973 fell on a Wednesday, and the day was officially declared a public holiday. However, it is said that despite all the euphoria surrounding the wedding of the Princess Royal, the crowd did not forget about Charles. While waiting for the bride, they would occasionally burst into singing "Happy Birthday" for her older brother. Princess Anne never idolized fashion, but that does not mean she did not understand it. Her Royal Highness's style attracted fans and fashion editors as early as the late 1960s, as the Queen's daughter looked elegant at every official event without losing the charm of youth. However, on her wedding day, Her Royal Highness intended to look not just young and fresh, she wished to look regal. It is known that Anne took a very active part in designing her wedding outfit, and the concept of a fully high-necked gown with an unusual sleeve construction belonged exclusively to her. Maureen Baker, the chief designer of the brand Susan Small, with whom Anne had already collaborated for several years, was called upon to bring the princess's idea to life. Naturally, as is always the case, the design of the dress was kept a strict secret from the general public. And it must be said, the surprise was a success. On November 14th, the bride appeared before her groom and the world in an original, yet at the same time quite modest, garment made of white silk. The bride's choice of tiara was also noteworthy. Her Royal Highness walked to the altar wearing the famous Queen Mary fringe tiara, commissioned by Elizabeth II's grandmother back in 1919. But what made it truly iconic was not that, but the fact that in 1947, Anne's mother, the future Queen of Great Britain, wore it when she got married. Incidentally, this tiara had caused Elizabeth herself some trouble. Just before the bride was due to leave the house, the ornament suddenly broke, so the procession had to be delayed until a jeweler arrived. Anne, fortunately, was much luckier. The diadem served her steadfastly all day long. The tradition wherein young pages and flower girls clumsily hold the train of the bride's dress was, of course, considered very sweet and touching in those days. But Anne, as always, had her own opinion on everything. Her train, as previously mentioned, was not designed for small children to help the bride walk to the altar. Only 2 children were assigned cherished roles at Anne's wedding. Anne's younger brother, Prince Edward, was appointed page boy, and her cousin, Lady Sarah Armstrong Jones, daughter of Princess Margaret, was a bridesmaid. Both were 9 years old at the time, and the bride's expectations were met. Edward and Sarah obediently walked with Anne and Mark to the altar and back, posed with everyone for official photographs, and did not fuss at all on the balcony of Buckingham Palace. One of the Queen's aides, during the wedding preparations, once called the marriage of Anne and Mark a strictly family event. But in reality, the event was certainly nothing of the sort. On the wedding day, about 2,000 guests were present in Westminster Abbey alone, including not only members of the British monarchy, but also representatives of other royal houses of Europe. Hundreds of thousands more gathered on the streets of London to catch at least a glimpse of the procession. Too much pressure for a strictly family event, wouldn't you agree? The protocol of a typical royal wedding in Great Britain on November 14th was followed almost to the smallest detail. The arrival of guests, the groom, and the bride with her father, everything was strictly regulated. Key traditions were also observed: the Welsh gold ring, myrtle in the bouquet, and the bride's vow, in which she promises to obey her husband. Yes, today it seems incredible, but the Princess Royal, despite all the independence of her character, still made that very promise from the ancient Book of Common Prayer. However, was it really such a surprise? After all, back in 1947, Elizabeth's mother, the future sovereign of the United Kingdom, made the same vow before God. But here is what is interesting. The very next royal bride, Lady Diana Spencer, would remove the word obey from her vow, sparking a new tradition. However, It is important to understand that the decision by Prince Charles's bride could not help but cause controversy at the time, so it would take quite a while for the new custom to become established. It is known, for example, that in 1986, Sarah Ferguson, Prince Andrew's bride, did not risk interpreting the vow in her own way. So, technically, Princess Anne was not, of course, the last bride to agree to obey her husband. But, strictly speaking, she became the last to choose to observe the tradition before Diana showed that royal brides have a right to choose on this matter. The wedding of Princess Anne and Mark Phillips was, of course, not the first royal wedding to be broadcast on television. However, having realized the full appeal of a live broadcast 13 years earlier at Princess Margaret's wedding, journalists obviously decided to cover the Princess Royal celebration with redoubled zeal. While Princess Margaret's wedding was watched live by about 300 million people around the world, Anne's marriage was broadcast to a global audience of 500 million people, according to BBC data. The Princess Royal and her newlywed husband received many valuable and very expensive gifts in honor of their marriage from foreign heads of state, royal families, and wealthy celebrities. The Queen gave her daughter a family diamond brooch. President Nixon and the U.S. government sent the newlyweds a massive crystal bowl and 4 gold candelabra. In addition, after November 14th, the bride and groom added to their collection of diamonds, jewelry, and art objects. However, the couple received many gifts from ordinary subjects as well, which included such trinkets as plastic forks, a dust cloth, a tea towel, scissors, etc. All this was carefully counted and published by the staff of St. James's Palace. In short, nothing could surprise Anne and Mark anymore. But it seems Her Majesty's Cabinet of Ministers managed to do so, because their gift, to put it mildly, did not entirely match either the capabilities of the governmental body or the status of the event. Some of the most influential people in the country, the government ministers, sent Anne and Mark as a gift, a small rug. To buy it, the officials chipped in £10 and 53 pence each. Anne and Mark spent their first wedding night at the historic White Lodge Mansion in Richmond Park, and the very next day, the newlyweds set off on their wedding trip. Like some royal couples before and after them, for their honeymoon, the spouses chose a cruise on the royal yacht Britannia, moored off the coast of Barbados. Anne and Mark flew to the country by plane. However, this trip turned out to be only partly romantic. The issue was that barely having set sail from the coast, the yacht, cruising the West Indies, hit a severe storm that did not subside for most of the first week. Naturally, under such conditions, romance was out of the question, as the lovers simply suffered from seasickness the entire time. Furthermore, as became known from declassified government archives, the Foreign Office, the British Ministry of Foreign Affairs, intended to disturb the couple's plans for privacy, obliging Anne to make 2 or 3 visits in Barbados, Ecuador, and Colombia. Why? And again, the reason lay in Princess Margaret's wedding. 13 years earlier, Her Highness and Anthony Armstrong Jones had gone on their wedding trip on the same yacht, but their honeymoon turned out to be so extravagant and expensive that the royal family faced another wave of criticism. So, to protect the Windsors and the government from a similar situation, officials intended to occupy Anne so as not to anger the subjects unnecessarily. The Princess Royal did not rebel and obediently carried out the assignment. It is not without reason that she is still considered the hardest working member of the royal family.